Welcome everyone to our new podcast. Before we start, just a few words about ourselves. The International Dialogue Initiative consists of a group of professionals who are engaged in a psychologically informed discussion of societal phenomena. And based on this psychologically informed dialogue, today we would like to focus on the unfortunate events in Ukraine and ask ourselves why the Russian invasion in Ukraine has led to so many diverse reactions around the world. There is widespread condemnation of the Russian actions and also genuine concern about what this means for issues like peace and security in Europe. And the question is, why are we witnessing so many different reactions? And to discuss this issue, we have three excellent experts who are all members of the IDI. They are Regine Scholz, who is our head of training in IDI, a German group analyst, and also editor of the IDI book, one of the editors of the IDI book, which is titled "We Don't Talk of Fear," about large group identity and societal conflict. This is exactly the core topic of the IDI. We also have Coline Covington, a psychoanalyst based in London, who also has worked on a book that will be published next year called "Who is to Blame? Collective Guilt on Trial." And last but not least, Anna Zajenkowska, a professor of psychology in Warsaw, Poland, also a group analyst, and the editor of the publication Europe on the Couch. Thank you all for your time and for your contribution to this discussion. To start, I would like to ask all of you to give your perspective from your respective geographical and also psychological, historical position on the issue or on the question, why are we witnessing so many different reactions? Maybe share with us your reactions, your country's reactions, and also your analysis of what's happening. And I would like to go in a geographical order, start with Anna, who is closest to where the events are happening, and then to Regine in Germany, and later to Coline in the UK. Thank you very much.
I tried to remind myself how it was 3 months ago, and we were super afraid, like afraid to death about the war, and afraid that it will spread to Poland. And now when I can think about it, I can say that at that time, I was not able to think about it. I was not able to talk to people from other countries about it. I had the feeling that nobody understands our position because we are so close and because of the history we share with Russia. Definitely the attachment to the Russian society is non-safe attachment. So we expected simply war. We expected, and when I spoke to people from the older generation who remembered times just after the Second World War, that were times where people were simply taken from the streets and sent directly to Siberia to die or to try to survive there. So it was like existential threat. And so basically that was this reaction. Impossibility to think and to talk to people from other groups except our group members. That was the reaction.
Thank you, Bijan. Thank you, Anna. I'd also try to recollect my feelings and my thoughts in the beginning and now in the developing conflict, developing situation. First, my personal feelings. I didn't feel very comfortable looking forward to this podcast, to be honest. Then I came to the conclusion that this feeling, this uncomfortable, uneasy feeling, well, is part of the whole problem, because we are in the middle of not only of a war, but if you look to the psychological side, of an intense regressive process of us and then we have a clear split. And in these situations, you have to be clearly on one side. You have to take sides, or you are urged to take sides. And if you don't take that position very clearly on one or the other side, then you are, as here in Germany, it's or from outside Germany, it's called, you are a traitor, you are a coward, you are weak, you are naive, whatever. So that are positions that cannot longer be discussed as politics that have a certain background and that have their rationales, but you are in these moral categories of being good or bad. So, and as I, from my side, sometimes I'm not so clear with that. I'm thinking more about interests. So the American, US interests are not the same as the Europeans, and different European countries have different interests also, as Anna described, due to their history and to their geographical location, position, with a long frontier you have to Russia, and all that kind of stuff that is coming to my mind that I really would like to discuss about, not only in this podcast now, but that really interests me about the whole conflict. But that is covered by this high moral stand at the moment. And on the other hand, also, that's also, of course, true for the German discussion, it's covered by narratives about the history. So when Putin is compared to Hitler, we had Saddam Hitler, we had Gaddafi Hitler, now we have Putin Hitler, means that Putin is evil. Okay, that's what you can say, but that is not in the political analysis. So that doesn't lead very far. It gives them a certain point, a starting point, but it doesn't lead very far. As others, parallels to history also can be rather misleading. We can perhaps say more about that later, I don't know. I guess I can leave it like that for the moment.
Thank you, Bijan. I just want to pick up on what Regine was referring to in terms of this connection that's made between Putin and Hitler in particular, because I've studied and written quite extensively about Hitler's Reich in Germany. And I think that it's helped me to have a certain understanding of the reaction in the UK towards the Ukraine, a reaction that I see spans a very extreme impetus to flee the country, on the one hand, because of this conviction that we're under threat, at least eventually, if not immediately, and at the other extreme, a very pervasive denial that is based initially on our insularity in the UK, that this is happening to them in Europe. This is not going to involve us. I overheard one young man saying, "We got through World War II very well. We hardly had any losses. And we'll get through this." And there's also a distinction in those reactions between the people who I think have some awareness, maybe a hyper awareness of history and how things don't always turn out well. And then on the other hand, this, as I said, this kind of existential denial. And the worst part of the denial that I see here, and of course it's everywhere in parts, which is this idea that how can a leader make a decision like this, and how could he really start a nuclear war, for example? Surely he wouldn't do anything so self-destructive. It's this assumption that Putin is a rational leader, not only rational, but a rational leader who thinks the way we do in the West. And that's key, because then we have lost all understanding of Putin, of Russia, of the, as Regine has said, of the history, of what their chosen glories are, of what their chosen traumas are, and why this is happening. On the other extreme, in terms of thinking about Putin, and I think this is also very common, is this idea, well, he's just mad. That it's the combination of COVID, maybe an illness, he's been locked, he's been in isolation too long, he's omnipotent, he's narcissistic, and the danger about seeing him as mad is that he then becomes a fluke. He becomes this leader who we can dismiss because he is crazy. And we don't, again, need to understand the cultural context in which he is operating, in which he is the leader, and why it is that so many Russians apparently, and there's a question mark over this, follow him. And that's, I think, our job within IDI, to try and understand the context and particularly large group behavior, why this is being, why Putin has a following, what this means to Russians, because without that, we have no tools to understand and to combat this.
I have actually many thoughts. When I was listening to both of you, I'm split between trying to understand Putin, but I have actually one idea that came to my mind about whether we can believe that Russians are following Putin. And for the last months, I was like quite sure, I wanted to believe it, that Russians are guilty because they are following Putin, like 80% support him. But that's very interesting. I've read some analysis on the polls, public polls in Russia and in Poland. And indeed, 80% supported Putin, but at the same time, I believe 89 or something % of people who were asked to participate in this poll denied. They did not want to participate because the polls, I mean, how they gather the information is by face-to-face interviews. So obviously you can't say in a face-to-face interview that you are against the war. So basically we can't trust the polls. And we have to understand that the idea is that in authoritarian societies, the leader says what is right and wrong, and then he or she manipulates the information so he gets what she wants or he wants. Yeah, Coline.
I'm very glad you pointed this out. It's very important. But I wanted to elaborate on that because I think one of the points actually that Hannah Arendt made about World War II was that there was so much misinformation that it was like a cloud of dust in people's eyes, so that nobody could trust the information that they read. And the effect of that was not to dissent, but not to agree, but was to be apathetic. You don't believe, you don't know what to believe. And this is, I think, crucial in terms of not only what happens within authoritarian regimes, but not only authoritarian regimes. You can see it happening in the States too. But the fact that with an apathetic population, they are easily led. They will not dissent anyway, because they don't know, they don't have the confidence to be able to dissent. At least that's my understanding. So it's a very ambiguous area. And Putin rules through this apathy, not through repression, so much as this cloud of dust of information.
I was thinking about what Regina said about the fact that you have to be on one side. And I was connecting that to these existential threats. Because when we are afraid of dying, basically, we humans, according to the terror management theory, what happens is that we try to protect our in-group members and our values. And I understand that one of the norm in Poland and also in Germany is that you should be on one side. Definitely in Germany, because of the history, you can't be ambiguous about the situation. You should be on the right side, because if you are not, we know what happened. In Poland is the same because of different reasons in terms of Russia and the relationship and the history. But you have to be against. We have also about 80% of people who said in polls, public polls, that they are against what's happening in Russia. And it's probably not only because it's wrong what they do, but it's also because we should say it, because it's only socially acceptable answer. But we are being on this one side because of the anxiety that we feel, that we are afraid, the things that we are afraid of. And the thing is that if our leaders and media could create better anxiety buffers, that's how it's called. For example, if they could awake different norms, like pro-social norms, for example, or religion, but in a sense that we could try to understand and not only understand, but maybe try to cope with the fear. We are, you know what I'm trying to say, that we could, that the anxiety buffer could function as secure attachments. Figures could help us to contain the negative feelings, the fear that we feel. That could help not to see Russians or any other perpetrating country as this devil country. And the same could probably apply to Putin, because actually the perception of him is as devil, and it's not right. He's a very traumatized person, probably.
Thank you, Anna. Regine, apart from giving your feedbacks to what you heard from Coline and Anna, I would like us to, because it's within the work of IDI, also talk a little bit about large group identity. It was mentioned in different ways, both by Coline and Anna, but please explain the concept a little bit, because we may have viewers and listeners who don't understand the concept, and also how it applies both to what we are saying about the Russians as a large group, but also the different European groups that are responding or reacting to these events.
Okay, I'll try my very best. First, a little comment to Anna, and then to Coline, and perhaps, and then I can somehow connect it with an explanation or some kind of definition of large group identity, because it's examples of that. When you said, okay, that's the only acceptable, social acceptable answer, and you explained that behind there is a fear, because everybody felt so threatened due to history and so on in Poland. So we had similar and still have similar reactions here. For example, in the very beginning, was just beginning of March, I think, it was the world renowned music conductor in Bavaria, in Munich, from the Munich orchestra, Gergiev. He was demanded that he would, he's Russian from nationality, that he says something against the war in Ukraine. He didn't say anything. And then he refused to say anything, and then he was dismissed. His contract was canceled. So, and we had several situations like that, that Volkan would call that purification acts, that every bad thing has to be expelled from the large group that in that situation comes to a regressive process. This time the German national large group, I guess that's a psychodynamic background is a bit different than in Poland, because here in Germany we are not so afraid that we will be the next victim. So the Ukrainians try to tell us that. The fear is underneath somewhere because of the nuclear option, but for the rest, it's not so present as for you that they could step over the border. It's more that this time Germans want to be on the right side. In World War II, we were the bad guys. This time we want to be the good guys. Something like that. It's going in that direction. With different ideas what would be the right way to be on the right side. That is that. And for coming back to these polls, these interviews, where they were made, I'm a bit hesitant. I would like really to see the design. Of course, if you have face-to-face interviews in situations where certain opinions are not wanted by the government, then it's not so probable that you will utter divergent opinions. That's clear. The other question is, where were these interviews made? Only in the cities? Because Russia is a large, huge country. And the countryside, people also, the Ukraine is far away from Novosibirsk. So if they really consider that from the aspects that we in Central Europe or Western Europe consider the whole thing, I doubt that. And what I want to draw your attention to, you have misinformation, you have a government that is thousands of kilometers away, and there is, that's also a research, there is an emotionally very active or important, let's say, template among Russian people. They always have the idea that the West doesn't understand them. Probably they are right. So the deep Russian soul and so on and so on. But there is a template that they are able to suffer, and that they can really bear hardships, very, very heavy hardships, and connecting that to wars. The template goes like that. The brave, simple, good-hearted Russian people are working hard and living a peaceful, modest life. Then a vicious enemy, out of the blue, is attacking them. And this enemy is very, very strong. It nearly brings them down. And then, in the very last moment, in a heroic effort, they manage to fight back with many, many sacrifices. But in the end, they succeed, they get the victory, and they throw out the enemy, and they can live in peace again. That's the narrative that's very, very active in Russia. And it's, of course, if we hear it, we think about Second World War, but it's older. It also refers to the Great Nordic War. That's the end of the 18th century with Sweden. It refers to Napoleon, who came up to Moscow. It refers to World War I, where they weren't really defeated. And of course, it refers to World War II. So they have the idea it can cost whatever it costs, and it can last long. So we shouldn't be, of course, in the cities, in Petersburg, in Moscow, you have intellectuals, that's different. They are desperate. And they are very much aware of disinformation and so on, and many of the young, very qualified people try to leave the country. But don't underestimate this huge country.
Thank you. So many aspects to look at, and I think obviously our time will be limited in this podcast, but let's try to cover some of these aspects later. Coline, I want to come back to you. You correctly said it would be a mistake to just explain the situation by saying Putin is irrational or a madman. I want to ask how we go about this, how we go about explaining the situation with the current level of complexity. And as you mentioned yourself, this factor of irrationality among politicians is not just confined to Russia. We have now, in the meantime, so many irrational actors on global stage. And how do we help, let's say, the average citizen, global citizen, to understand the complexities and, not react naively, but at the same time also not immediately jump to the worst case scenario?
That's quite a big question, Bijan. I think Regine has gone a long way in answering some of your question in the sense of highlighting the importance that this is not just an acting out in the present, that there is a history, a cultural and social history that is behind all of these actions and behind our own attitudes to what's going on. And that's very important to understand, along with the fact that this is clearly an identity war. And I mean, not that that's true, that's probably true with all wars at the basis of them. But when the day that Russia invaded Ukraine, Putin actually said that Russia was under threat for their historical future, which I think echoes what Regine has just described very well. And with this existential threat that Putin feels, that Russia feels, that's infected. I think Poland has infected a lot of Europe. And it's this, if you like, projective identification and the threats that are going out from Putin that we're all caught up in. And then, of course, we tend to regroup, which is true with NATO and the United States, and form new identities or what may seem like new identities. But also we create divisions within that in terms of renewing our own sense of identity. But, I was reading a bit more about Macron's criticism, the criticism that has been leveled at Macron for saying that we must not humiliate Putin. And it was taken out of context. And I think, to be fair to Macron, he is understanding the psychology better than certainly a lot of people in the United States and maybe in the UK too, in the sense that he understands the humiliation. And again, Regine has pointed to centuries of this. It's become part of the national identity in a way, to fight against this and to believe that Russia is a nation of victims. And I think Macron's right in the sense that it's a very easy situation to escalate. And we escalate it if we want to retaliate and push Putin's nose in these mistakes. And that hasn't worked. And I think the United States actually has been extremely smart so far about actually reining back that kind of retaliatory defense or offense. And I think NATO has also been trying to contain that. But I know that there are backlashes of people who say, no, we must follow the moral dilemma or the moral victimization of Ukraine, that they're killing them. Why should we worry about humiliating Russia? It's just bad strategy, basically. And at the same time, as the oligarch Khodorkovsky and as the chess champion Kasparov have pointed out, Putin is a gangster. He's not playing by the rules that we imagine should be played. And we have to take this into account. We're not just dealing with this rational politician, but we have to deal with a gangster and a gangster mentality. And how we do that, I don't know, but I think a lot of the West is doing a fairly good job so far in containing the threats of further violence.
Thank you. We can obviously assess or evaluate the conduct of the Western government, but I think one fact that's important and that explains a lot of reactions outside Europe is that the West has failed in the past to uphold what you can call the rules-based order by not reacting to similar actions in other places, in other geographies of the world. One thinks of Saudi Arabia's attacks on Yemen and so many other situations where the West has just protected its ally, its protege, without really thinking about what kind of behavior patterns emerge as a result of not paying attention. But back to Europe, Anna, I want to know from your perspective in Poland, do the reactions of Western governments, how they are trying to support Ukraine with humanitarian assistance, with arms supplies and so on, does that assure or reassure the Polish population who are afraid of Putin? Do they feel that they are not alone, or is the fear still there on a different level?
I think we don't, as a society in general, I don't think we feel secure. I think that the opinions are split. So part of the society believes we can trust, and part of the society don't believe in NATO or USA. And I think, again, it's related to our insecure attachment and the feeling that we were left so many times in the past, and we're actually partitioned a few times by other countries. We disappeared. So we can't really be sure that other people will help us. So yes, that's the situation. But I was wondering about what you said, and I like the idea about not humiliating, because it's again, by the projective identification processes, I believe that this is what Putin or his regime is inviting us, I mean the Western world, to do. So to retaliate, so they can feel humiliated, and it would be justified for them to attack more. And that's the vicious circle. So that's why it's so important that we activate the other values of behaving pro-socially and understanding, but also saying, stop, this is not what you should do. And I believe this is what should have been done in 2013 with Krim, when it was, taken by Russians, and Europe did not react. That was a mistake, I believe. But I was thinking also about, I was also thinking about the beginning of the war. What were the reasons? And you said something that the behavior is irrational. It came to my mind that some of the recent conflicts, like the one in Syria, for example, also started because of the climate changes. And that's something that we don't speak about. And it's like a serious thing, because what happened with Russia for the last year, decades, was that they build the economy based on coal, for example, export and other natural resources. And if we want to protect the climate, we need to stop doing that. We need to stop using those fuels and change them. So, and Russia knows that. So that would mean that in few years, in the future, the economy would decrease. And this is what has been happening in Russia for the last years. They started seeing problems. So it's not fully irrational, because they were protecting their, narcissistic power. They wanted to be powerful, but they knew, or he and his regime, that it would stop. That's why they needed to do something about it. And war possibly was one of the options. And also when you think about that in the future, like in 30 years, the resources will be very scary in Europe in terms of water, food. So having less people is rational. So war, yeah, what I'm saying is that let's think about what is rational in terms of humanity living, of people living in Europe, having more people or having less people. Maybe this is what we, I know it's irrational, maybe it seems irrational, but maybe.
No. I think instead of talking about rationality and irrationality, let's agree that the situation is just very, very complex. Yeah. And there could be different layers of this complexity. As you say, there are economic considerations. But even if any of these rationales that we take, whether we take the energy-related one, economic one, historical one, whoever starts a process, like in this case, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, cannot really control what will happen. I mean, if for example, the energy considerations were the initial thoughts, well, Russia is losing out because it's being sanctioned. And it will change the dynamics of the energy markets and reduce Europe's dependency on Russia. So let's just agree it's complex. I want to come to the close gradually. And Coline, I just want to mention, because we are called the International Dialogue Initiative, and I think we all believe that dialogue is an important tool in resolving a number of these tensions and issues. I want to invite all of you, and Coline, we can start with you, to just make some suggestions. What kind of dialogue do we need to move forward? You know, to sort of digest what's happening, understand the complexities, but also try to move forward as the human race, as the sort of international order. Some suggestions. What dialogues are needed and what groups should engage in dialogue?
Bijan, I don't think there's a should in this. I think we do what we can and encourage, as we are this evening, to have a dialogue initially amongst ourselves, and that spreads. Hopefully it will spread and spread and spread. And this is, I think, the best we can hope for, and it's important. It's not insignificant. But I would like to remove the should from it because I don't think it works.
Sure. I think you wanted to also give a reaction to what Anna said. Am I right? If you want,
I did,
just
yes.
Share that with us, and then I will go to the other.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I think that we're missing recognizing the role of ideology, and that's very closely linked to identity. But, you know, it's very well to say there are these rational reasons for Russia to expand, so forth. But what we forget, we haven't mentioned Crimea, first of all. Putin gave, in his annual speech after he was elected president in December, I think it was 2012, he actually referred to the Russian historian Gumilev, who had this vision of a Eurasian large area that is part of Russia's heart, and to restore that, to bring to further that, and as a part of that ideology, that it works on all kinds of different levels in terms of restoration of the past, overturning humiliation, but also there has been a political vacuum within Russia since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And that's very important to recognize, because you can read it in Svetlana Alexievich's book, Secondhand Time, where there's huge disillusionment amongst all kinds of levels and groups of people within Russia about what to believe in. And this is something that Putin, these ideas of Gumilev and Ivan Ilyich, the Russian fascist philosopher, have profoundly influenced Putin and are coming to the fore at a time when the population are probably hungry for some kind of meaning to give to the, as Regine pointed out, to this notion of sacrifice. You can't sacrifice for something unless there's a meaning in it. And I think that these things are very important for us to keep in mind. And it's not just Russians, it's all of us.
But just one thing, can I add quickly? Just one sentence.
Go ahead.
But Coline, what you said, it's very interesting. But still, in my mind, the question is why they want to be so huge. And I believe that could be analyzed in relation to the object relation theory. The problem is that perhaps what's in their identity is that if they are that this is the only way to be accepted. That the only way to be accepted by others is to be huge. If you are not huge, you can't be accepted. You will be rejected. And this.
I disagree.
You disagree?
Yeah. I don't think that's what's at stake. I think that there is a perception within Russia that certain areas like Ukraine, like maybe Poland, Belarus, Crimea, Georgia are Russian.
Yes, I agree, but they think that
it's not getting bigger.
Yeah, but the thing is that they believe that this is the only way to include us. Otherwise, we won't have relation and we despise them. This is the problem. So they don't believe that we can have successful and fruitful relationships except they will invade us. And that's the problem. This is what is being replayed and replayed over again.
Because you then represent the West. It's a further alliance with the West, which, going back to Regine, there's the myth that the West is a different culture, they don't understand.
Yeah,
it's a threat.
It's a threat, and then we can't communicate, we can't create any bonds.
I think we have to come to an end for this podcast, but what you're discussing, especially the notion of competing narratives and parallel narratives that are obviously also made possible through social media and through all the new technologies that have come into the sphere of communications may be a topic for another podcast. But I want to give the final word to Regine. If you have any suggestions on how to move forward, what kind of dialogues we need. Regine.
Just a few words at the end about what kind of dialogue. First, I would like to plead for some modesty. It's not, especially not for us, who we are not in charge on high political levels and so on, for us to have the dialogue between Biden and Putin and Zelensky or whoever. So I don't have ideas for that. And I think it's not the moment for that. You need a certain power constellation that the opponents feel themselves that dialogue could help them. And if they then ask experts to help, that's something else. One can tell you a lot about that. The other thing is
sorry, Regine, I meant on our level, not political dialogue,
okay,
but really
that's what I wanted
to understand the psychological dimension.
I want to come to that. What I think what we can do, and perhaps it's our task if you take it on, is to help in our countries, where we are, working places, wherever, just to open dialogues, to open the closed or tendencies that the communication is closed with social accepted formula, and no other opinions or ideas or a different vision also of history Usually, if you look a little bit closer, it becomes a bit more complicated. Who did what? So just to come from this regressive communication style, you can also say it's unmentalized speech. It's not, when everything is sacred, you can't discuss it anymore. It's not, you can negotiate. If it's sacred values, look at, if you analyze the speeches of Zelensky, it's unmentalized speech most of the time, but he knows what he's doing. He's not unmentalized in a certain way. So to have an open discussion, at least in our countries, as far as we can contribute to that, with of course all the different positions that are coming up then when you just put up open the pot. And the other, and then also Europe wouldn't look so hypocrite from outside if we would do that, if we would just act according to our proclaimed values, would be a good idea. So that's really helpful. And the other point is, as far as we have the possibility, keep contact with Russian colleagues. Also, keep these channels open or reopen them if possible. Of course, we have to be cautious not to bring anybody in danger, but they are so alone. That's it.
Thank you, Regine. Any final comments from Coline or Anna?
I just want to say that I really like, Regina, what you said about the embedded values in the Western world. And we can choose what we want to activate, which values we want to use right now and show show as examples which might help us to deal with anxiety, and possibly that could be helpful to other societies also, or groups, maybe not societies. Yeah.
I agree. This is what I wanted to get at actually in terms of dialogue. I think we need a dialogue on values and on shared values. So it's something that also shapes identities, but really also shared values that we can use in times of crises like this. In any case, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to moderate this, and I learned a lot, and I look forward to future opportunities.